Welcome to Smart Reads in Minutes. Today we're diving into Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg with a detailed chapter-by-chapter summary. Let's get started. Introduction: The Search for True Productivity. The book opens with Charles Duhigg's personal struggles with productivity while finishing his previous book about the science of habit formation. During this time, he was overwhelmed with work at the New York Times, personal responsibilities at home with his newborn child, and the pressure of finalizing his book's manuscript. He describes his life as an endless cycle of to-do lists, urgent emails, and last-minute edits, feeling as if he were constantly moving but not making real progress. Amid this chaos, he reached out to Atul Gawande, a surgeon, best-selling author, and public health advocate, seeking insight into how he managed to be so productive across multiple demanding careers. Gawande, however, declined the request due to an already packed schedule, one that included a family vacation and a rock concert with his kids. Duhigg initially assumed Gawande was busy with high-stakes professional obligations, but it turned out that he was deliberate about taking personal time for leisure and family. This revelation highlighted an important lesson. Real productivity is not just about cramming in more tasks, but about making intentional choices regarding time, energy, and focus. This realization led Duhigg to question why some people and organizations are able to achieve extraordinary levels of efficiency and success while others struggle. He embarked on a multi-year investigation, interviewing psychologists, business leaders, and experts from diverse fields to uncover the principles behind true productivity. He discovered that the secret wasn't just better organization or new tools, but rather a shift in mindset, certain habits, decision-making techniques, and ways of structuring work that made individuals and teams more effective. Through the book, he explores 8 key productivity principles, drawn from real-world case studies and scientific research. He examines how Marines instill motivation in new recruits by forcing them to make decisions, how Google built its most effective teams through psychological safety, and how poker players use probabilistic thinking to improve their decision-making. Each chapter presents a different concept, revealing how people can work smarter, not harder. Duhigg argues that modern productivity struggles stem from misplaced focus. Too often, people chase tools and hacks instead of understanding the deeper psychological and cognitive processes that drive efficiency. The modern world, with its constant stream of information and technological advancements, should make life easier, but instead, it has led to greater stress and an illusion of busyness without real progress. The book sets out to provide actionable strategies to change this by adopting the principles of self-motivation, team dynamics, focus, goal setting, decision-making, innovation, data absorption, and managing others, individuals, and organizations can dramatically improve their effectiveness. At its core, Smarter, Faster, Better is not just about working harder, but about making smarter choices, choosing the right goals, framing decisions correctly, and creating environments that support sustained, meaningful productivity. Motivation: reimagining boot camp, nursing home rebellions, and the locus of control. The chapter begins with a gripping narrative from Marine Corps boot camp, following a young recruit named Eric Quintanilla as he struggles through a grueling test known as the Crucible. This final challenge of basic training is designed to push recruits to their physical and mental limits. After 2 days of near-constant marching, exhaustion, and hunger, Quintanilla and his fellow recruits must complete a treacherous final obstacle known as the Grim Reaper, a steep hill that serves as the last test before they officially earn the title of Marine. In the midst of this ordeal, Quintanilla and his squad mates use a technique taught by their drill instructors, asking each other why. They repeat their motivations out loud to remind themselves of their personal reasons for enduring the hardship, reinforcing their determination. For Quintanilla, his newborn daughter Zoe becomes his driving force. The chapter then shifts to the underlying psychological principle that the Marine Corps seeks to instill in recruits: an internal locus of control, the belief that their actions directly influence their future. General Charles Krulak, a former Marine Corps commandant, was responsible for reshaping boot camp to foster this mindset. He had observed that many modern recruits lacked self-direction and resilience. They had been raised in environments where they followed instructions, but had little experience making autonomous decisions. In combat, however, Marines must be capable of independent thinking and rapid decision-making. To cultivate this, Krulak restructured boot camp to force recruits into situations where they had to problem-solve on their own. For example, in one drill, recruits are given the task of cleaning the mess hall, but are provided no instructions. They must figure out where to find cleaning supplies, how to operate the industrial dishwasher, and how to coordinate their efforts, all while under extreme time pressure. Even small tasks, such as deciding how to arrange ketchup bottles, become exercises in leadership and initiative. Drill instructors deliberately avoid stepping in, allowing recruits to struggle and learn through trial and error. The goal is to teach them that taking control, no matter how small the decision, is what fosters motivation and resilience. Duhigg then pivots to an entirely different setting, a nursing home, where researchers observed a strikingly similar dynamic. Elderly residents who made small choices, such as rearranging their furniture or trading food at mealtimes, were significantly healthier and more engaged than those who passively followed the institution's rules. These subversive residents, as researchers called them, demonstrated a strong internal locus of control, refusing to accept the rigid structure imposed on them. One resident deliberately refused to eat cake, not because he disliked it, but because he wanted to assert his autonomy over his meals. These small rebellions had profound psychological benefits, leading to higher levels of activity, better physical health, and longer lifespans. The connection between motivation and perceived control is further supported by a series of psychological studies. One notable experiment, conducted by Charles Duhigg, involved giving fifth graders a set of challenging puzzles. After completing them, one group was praised for their intelligence, "You're really smart," while another was praised for their effort, "You must have worked really hard." When given the option to choose between an easier or harder puzzle for the next round, the children praised for effort overwhelmingly chose the harder challenge, while those praised for intelligence opted for the easier task. This demonstrated that reinforcing an internal locus of control, focusing on effort and choice rather than fixed traits, made individuals more willing to take on difficult challenges. The chapter then returns to neuroscience, specifically the role of the striatum, a region in the brain linked to motivation. Duhigg discusses research conducted on patients who suffered tiny injuries in their striatum, often due to strokes or carbon monoxide poisoning. Despite being physically healthy and cognitively intact, these patients lost all sense of drive. They could complete tasks if specifically instructed, but they would sit motionless unless prompted, as if their internal motivation had been erased. Scientists discovered that the striatum plays a critical role in translating decisions into action. It is not just responsible for physical movement, but also for the emotional drive that compels people to take initiative. This insight led researchers to conduct experiments to better understand the mechanisms of motivation. In one study, participants played a simple guessing game while inside an fMRI scanner. The results showed that when individuals made their own choices, regardless of whether they won or lost, their striata lit up with activity. However, when the computer made choices for them, the brain's motivation center remained inactive. This suggests that motivation is not simply about outcomes, but about the act of making decisions itself. When people feel in control, their brains respond with greater engagement and anticipation. The chapter concludes by tying all these threads together. Motivation, Duhigg argues, is not a fixed trait, but a skill that can be cultivated. The key is learning to make choices that reinforce our sense of control and connecting those choices to personal meaning. Whether it's a Marine enduring boot camp, an elderly nursing home resident resisting institutionalization, or a child tackling a difficult puzzle, the underlying principle remains the same. People are most motivated when they feel they have autonomy and when their actions are linked to a larger purpose. By consciously fostering this mindset, making small choices that assert control and finding personal meaning in tasks, anyone can improve their motivation. Whether in personal life or professional settings, the ability to reframe challenges as self-directed choices is what separates the merely busy from the truly productive. Teams, psychological safety at Google and Saturday Night Live. The chapter opens with a discussion on Google's quest to understand what makes a team successful. In 2012, the company launched Project Aristotle, a massive initiative aimed at identifying the characteristics that define high-performing teams. Google's People Operations Department, responsible for hiring and workplace culture, initially assumed that the best teams were made up of the best individuals. However, after extensive research, they found that individual intelligence or talent was not the defining factor of a great team. Instead, the most effective teams shared one key trait: psychological safety. Psychological safety, a concept developed by Harvard professor Amy Edmondson, refers to a shared belief among team members that the group is a safe environment for interpersonal risk-taking. It means that people feel comfortable speaking up, admitting mistakes, and sharing unconventional ideas without fear of embarrassment or punishment. Google's research found that teams with high psychological safety were significantly more successful than those without it, even when the latter had more experienced or talented individuals. Google struggled with how to teach psychological safety to its teams, as simply telling employees to be open and trusting was not enough. Instead, the company identified specific behavioral norms that encourage psychological safety, such as equal turn-taking in conversations and social sensitivity, the ability to read and respond to others' emotions. The chapter then transitions to a case study of Saturday Night Live, SNL, and how its unique team dynamics fostered creativity. In 1975, Lorne Michaels was assembling the first cast and writing team for the show, traveling across the country to find every comedic talent he could. The final team was a mix of established comedians, unknown actors, and writers, with drastically different styles. Many of them clashed, forming rivalries and factions, yet the show succeeded in producing groundbreaking comedy. Despite frequent conflicts, the SNL team managed to work effectively together due to the presence of psychological safety. Even when jokes were harshly criticized, there was an underlying sense of trust that allowed people to continue contributing. Michaels cultivated an environment where everyone felt like they had a voice, even as they competed for airtime and attention. He encouraged an I-over-team mentality, meaning that while individuality was celebrated, it was balanced by norms that ensured collaboration. Writers and performers could pitch absurd or controversial ideas without fear of immediate rejection. The culture of SNL was one of constant creative tension, but it worked because everyone understood that disagreement was part of the process rather than a personal attack. Duhigg connects these two stories by emphasizing that the most effective teams do not necessarily have the best individuals, but instead have structures that encourage open communication, risk-taking, and mutual respect. Psychological safety does not mean the absence of conflict. It means creating an environment where conflict is productive rather than destructive. Google's findings and SNL's success both demonstrate that when people feel safe to contribute, they are more engaged, innovative, and willing to take risks. Ultimately, fostering psychological safety is not about eliminating disagreements, but about ensuring that those disagreements do not discourage participation. Focus: Cognitive Tunneling, Air France, Flight 447, and the Power of Mental Models. The chapter begins with the tragic story of Air France Flight 447, which crashed into the Atlantic Ocean in 2009, killing all 228 people on board. Investigators were initially baffled by the disaster. The plane was one of the most advanced commercial aircraft in history, with highly automated controls designed to prevent pilot errors. However, When they recovered the black box recordings, they found that the pilots had become overwhelmed by an unexpected situation and failed to take the correct actions. The underlying cause of the crash was not a mechanical failure, but a cognitive failure known as cognitive tunneling, a state in which people become so fixated on a single piece of information that they ignore everything else, even when other critical details are available. The co-pilot, Bonin, was at the controls when the crisis began. The plane's airspeed sensors malfunctioned due to ice buildup, causing the autopilot to disengage. Suddenly, Bonin was forced to fly the plane manually at high altitude, a situation he was unprepared for. Instead of assessing the situation calmly, he panicked and instinctively pulled the plane's nose up, putting it into a stall. Despite multiple warnings from the aircraft's systems and his fellow pilots, Bonin continued pulling up, believing he was climbing when, in reality, the plane was losing altitude rapidly. His brain was locked in cognitive tunneling. He had fixated on one incorrect mental model and could not process new information that contradicted it. Even in the final moments, he remained confused, asking, "But what's happening?" just seconds before impact. Duhigg contrasts this with another aviation incident, Qantas Flight 32, which suffered a massive engine failure in 2010, but managed to land safely. Captain Richard de Crespigny, the lead pilot, was faced with a barrage of alarms, system failures, and contradictory data. However, unlike Bonin, he remained calm and methodically worked through the crisis. The key difference was that de Crespigny had built strong mental models, internal narratives that helped him process information and prioritize the right actions. Mental models are the stories we tell ourselves about how the world works. People with strong mental models constantly engage in preloading their brains with scenarios of what they expect to happen. This allows them to quickly recognize when something is wrong and adjust accordingly. De Crespigny had spent years imagining potential emergencies and rehearsing responses in his mind. So when disaster struck, he did not panic. Instead, he systematically diagnosed the problem, communicated with his team, and made calculated decisions that saved the plane and its passengers. The importance of mental models extends beyond aviation. Duhigg cites a study of neonatal nurses who worked in high-pressure environments. One nurse, Darlene, noticed that an infant in her care was sick, even though the baby's vitals appeared normal. She later explained that she had an internal picture of what a healthy baby should look like, and when this infant did not match that model, she investigated further. Her ability to detect subtle warning signs came from years of constructing detailed mental models of infant health. Duhigg then connects these insights to everyday productivity. In modern life, distractions are everywhere. Emails, meetings, notifications, and social media constantly pull our attention in different directions. Without strong mental models, people become susceptible to cognitive tunneling, reacting impulsively instead of making deliberate choices. The key to maintaining focus is to actively construct mental models throughout the day. This means visualizing tasks before starting them, anticipating challenges, and telling oneself stories about what to expect. When people engage in this habit, they are better at filtering out distractions and staying focused on what truly matters. The chapter concludes by reinforcing that attention is not just about avoiding distractions, but about directing focus intentionally. Just as de Crespigny avoided disaster by building mental models in advance, individuals can improve their productivity by consciously shaping how they think. Whether in high-stakes environments like aviation or in everyday work, the ability to anticipate, plan, and narrate experiences is what separates those who thrive from those who succumb to cognitive overload. Goal setting: SMART goals, stretch goals, and the Yom Kippur War. The chapter begins with the story of Eli Zira, an Israeli general who, in 1972, was promoted to head the Directorate of Military Intelligence. His primary responsibility was to provide Israeli leadership with timely warnings of potential attacks. At the time, Israel had become overconfident following its victory in the Six-Day War of 1967, during which it had decisively defeated Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. However, the constant threats from these neighboring countries meant that a renewed attack was always a possibility. The Israeli government sought clarity in its intelligence assessments, but the reports it received were inconsistent, sometimes raising alarms unnecessarily, and sometimes failing to provide a clear course of action. Zira aimed to change this by implementing a structured system based on clear criteria, known as the concept. His approach was rooted in modern goal-setting techniques, aligning with what psychologists call SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound objectives. Zira argued that no Arab country would risk another war unless it had a strong enough air force and long-range missiles capable of hitting Tel Aviv. He developed a framework to evaluate threats, ensuring that only intelligence fitting this model would be considered credible. This system helped provide a sense of order and decisiveness, but also blinded Israeli leaders to the warning signs of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. When intelligence reports indicated that Egypt and Syria were preparing for an invasion, Zira dismissed them because the criteria of the concept had not been met. His overcommitment to a rigid goal-setting structure prevented the Israeli government from acting in time, leading to a devastating surprise attack. Duhigg uses this historical case study to illustrate the power and limitations of structured goal-setting. He explains that while SMART goals are effective at breaking down tasks into manageable steps, they can also create tunnel vision, preventing individuals and organizations from reassessing their larger objectives. In contrast, stretch goals, which are ambitious and often unrealistic objectives, encourage innovation and adaptability. While Zira's strict SMART goal system helped bring order to intelligence gathering, it lacked the flexibility to account for unexpected developments. His failure was not in using SMART goals, but in relying on them exclusively, without periodically stepping back to ask broader questions. The chapter transitions to the corporate world, where General Electric, GE, serves as a case study of how organizations balance SMART and stretch goals. In the 1980s, GE formalized its goal-setting system, requiring all employees to draft objectives that adhered to SMART criteria. This approach increased efficiency and accountability, but also made some teams overly cautious, focusing only on attainable goals rather than ambitious innovations. In response, GE introduced stretch goals, encouraging employees to set seemingly impossible objectives while still using SMART goals to break them down into manageable steps. This combination proved highly effective, demonstrating that the best approach to goal setting is one that balances structure with ambition. Duhigg concludes that effective goal setting requires both clarity and flexibility. While structured goals help individuals and teams make measurable progress, they should not become rigid constraints that prevent adaptation. The key is to combine SMART and stretch goals, ensuring that ambition is tempered with practical steps. Just as GE found success by blending the two approaches, individuals and organizations can achieve greater productivity by pursuing bold objectives, while maintaining a system that allows for continuous reassessment. The lesson from Zira's failure is that goals should guide us, but they should not become blinders that prevent us from seeing new information or alternative possibilities. Managing others, solving a kidnapping with lean and agile thinking and a culture of trust. The chapter opens with a dramatic account of the kidnapping of Frank Jansen, a 63-year-old national security consultant, from his home in North Carolina. One morning, Jansen was ambushed by armed assailants, restrained with zip ties, and thrown into the trunk of a car. His captors transported him to an apartment in Atlanta, where they planned to execute him. His wife, unaware of what had happened, became suspicious when she found bloodstains near their home's entrance. Hours later, she received a chilling text message from an unknown number, warning her not to contact the police, or they would send her husband back to her in 6 separate boxes. The FBI quickly became involved, launching a massive operation to track down Jansen. The investigation was complicated by the fact that the kidnappers were operating across multiple states and communicating through burner phones. However, instead of following traditional hierarchical structures, the FBI adopted a lean and agile management approach, empowering agents on the ground to make independent decisions. This shift mirrored Toyota's lean production system, where workers on the factory floor were given autonomy to stop the assembly line if they noticed a problem. In the past, the FBI had relied on rigid command structures, but this case demonstrated that decentralizing authority allowed agents to act more efficiently. One of the breakthroughs in the case came when an agent working with the FBI's digital forensics team noticed a pattern in the kidnapper's phone records. Instead of waiting for approval from higher-ups, the agent followed a hunch and cross-referenced the numbers with an existing database of criminal networks. This led investigators to Kelvin Melton, a notorious gang leader serving a life sentence in a North Carolina prison. It turned out that Melton had orchestrated the kidnapping from behind bars, using contraband cell phones to direct his associates. The motive was revenge. Jansen had previously played a role in prosecuting Melton, and the gang leader sought retribution. The FBI's adoption of agile thinking, inspired by the software industry, played a crucial role in resolving the case. Unlike traditional project management methods, where teams outline every step in advance, agile thinking emphasizes flexibility and rapid iteration. Agents were encouraged to follow leads as they emerged, adapting their strategy in real time. This approach ultimately led to Jansen's rescue. When agents pinpointed his location, SWAT teams stormed the Atlanta apartment, arresting the captors and freeing Jansen, who had been held for 6 days. Duhigg connects this case to broader lessons about leadership and management. He argues that successful organizations foster a culture of trust, where employees feel empowered to take initiative without fear of punishment. At Toyota, factory workers were given control over production lines, allowing them to identify and resolve problems before they escalated. Similarly, at the FBI, agents who were trusted to make independent decisions were able to act quickly, without bureaucratic delays. In contrast, organizations with rigid hierarchies often stifle innovation and slow down problem-solving because employees hesitate to take risks. The chapter also examines how the FBI applied these lessons to its internal operations, particularly in the development of Sentinel, the Bureau's modern case management system. Previously, the FBI had struggled with outdated technology that made it difficult to share information across departments. To address this, the Bureau adopted agile software development principles, breaking large projects into smaller, iterative steps. This shift, similar to how Toyota transformed manufacturing and how Pixar revolutionized animated filmmaking, allowed teams to build a system that could rapidly process intelligence and connect seemingly unrelated cases. As a result, Sentinel became a crucial tool for future investigations, helping solve thousands of crimes. Duhigg concludes by emphasizing that trust and autonomy are the foundations of effective management. The FBI's success in rescuing Jansen was not just a result of good detective work, but also of a leadership philosophy that empowered individuals to think and act independently. Organizations that encourage employees to take ownership of their work and provide them with the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances are far more successful than those that rely on rigid top-down control. Just as Toyota's lean manufacturing system revolutionized car production and agile thinking transformed software development, these principles can be applied to any field, creating environments where employees are more engaged, innovative, and effective. Decision-making. Forecasting the future and winning at poker with Bayesian psychology. The chapter opens with a tense scene from the 2004 Tournament of Champions, where professional poker player Annie Duke faces a crucial decision. Sitting at a televised final table with a massive pile of chips in the center, Duke finds herself in a standoff with Greg "Fossilman" Raymer, a formidable opponent known for his aggressive playing style. She holds a pair of tens, a strong hand, but Raymer has just gone all in, forcing her to choose between folding and risking everything. As she deliberates, Duke reflects on the complexities of decision-making under uncertainty. Unlike many forms of gambling, Poker is not purely a game of chance. It is a game of probabilistic thinking, where players must constantly update their assumptions based on limited information. Duke's ability to navigate uncertainty using Bayesian reasoning is what ultimately allows her to succeed in high-stakes situations. The chapter then shifts to the concept of Bayesian psychology, named after the 18th century mathematician Thomas Bayes. Bayesian thinking is based on the idea that decision-making should be an iterative process, where individuals continuously update their beliefs as they receive new information. Rather than relying on fixed assumptions, Bayesian reasoning encourages people to think in probabilities, adjusting their expectations as new data emerges. This principle is widely used in fields ranging from finance to medicine, where accurate forecasting is essential. However, Duhigg argues that most people struggle with Bayesian thinking in everyday life because they tend to seek certainty rather than embracing uncertainty. Humans are wired to prefer definitive answers, even when reality is inherently unpredictable. To illustrate the power of Bayesian reasoning, Duhigg introduces the Good Judgment Project (GJP), a research initiative that sought to improve intelligence forecasting. Sponsored by the U.S. government, the project assembled teams of ordinary individuals and asked them to predict geopolitical events, such as election outcomes and military conflicts. Surprisingly, the best forecasters were not intelligence analysts or policy experts, but rather super forecasters, people who consistently updated their beliefs based on new evidence. These individuals demonstrated exceptional probabilistic thinking, recognizing that no forecast is ever 100% certain and that good decision-making requires constant revision. The study found that those trained in Bayesian reasoning made significantly more accurate predictions than their untrained counterparts. Duhigg then returns to Annie Duke, explaining how she applies Bayesian thinking at the poker table. When facing an unfamiliar opponent, she starts with general assumptions based on stereotypes. For example, she assumes that an older businessman is likely to play conservatively, while a young online player may be more aggressive. However, as the game progresses, she adjusts these assumptions based on observed behavior. If the older businessman starts making bold bets, she revises her belief that he is risk-averse. This iterative process allows her to make more informed decisions, improving her odds of success over time. The key difference between prejudice and Bayesian thinking, she explains, is the willingness to continuously update one's beliefs rather than clinging to initial assumptions. The chapter concludes by emphasizing the importance of probabilistic thinking in everyday life. Whether deciding on a career move, making an investment, or choosing a life partner, people must learn to embrace uncertainty rather than fear it. Duhigg argues that successful individuals are not necessarily those who predict the future with certainty, but those who are comfortable navigating ambiguity. By training themselves to think probabilistically, evaluating different possible outcomes, and continuously refining their assumptions, people can make better decisions and improve their ability to forecast future events. The key takeaway is that the best decision makers are not those who have perfect knowledge, but those who recognize what they don't know and adjust accordingly. Innovation: How idea brokers and creative desperation saved Disney's Frozen. The chapter opens with a pivotal moment at Walt Disney Animation Studios, where a group of animators, writers, and directors gather for an early screening of Frozen. The film is still in development and anticipation is high. As the lights dim, the audience watches the story unfold. Anna, the younger sister, is portrayed as an uptight, bossy character obsessed with her upcoming wedding, while Elsa, the elder sister, is depicted as an evil queen plotting to overthrow the kingdom. Olaf, the comic relief snowman, is sarcastic and manipulative. When the screening ends, the room is silent. Normally, Disney screenings are met with cheers and tears, but this time, the atmosphere is grim. The film, despite years of work, is not resonating emotionally. The creative team realizes they are in serious trouble. The chapter delves into the role of idea brokers, individuals who facilitate the cross-pollination of ideas between different industries and disciplines. Duhigg introduces the concept of innovation through recombination, where breakthrough ideas often emerge from the fusion of existing concepts rather than from pure originality. He cites historical examples, such as the development of the printing press, which combined movable type with wine pressing technology. In the case of Frozen, the creative team needed to rethink the movie's core themes, drawing inspiration from outside sources to breathe new life into the story. The turning point came when Jennifer Lee, one of the film's writers, suggested a radical shift in the story's emotional foundation. She argued that the central conflict should not be a battle between good and evil, but rather a story about sisterhood, love, and self-acceptance. Instead of making Elsa a villain, the team decided to explore her struggle with self-doubt and isolation, transforming her into a more complex and sympathetic character. This shift in perspective led to the creation of Let It Go, a defining moment in the film. The song, written by Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez, reframed Elsa's journey as one of empowerment rather than vengeance. The moment the team heard Let It Go for the first time, they knew they had found the heart of the movie. However, challenges remained. Even after reworking the characters, the team struggled with the film's ending. They knew that Anna needed to make a personal sacrifice to save Elsa, but they couldn't figure out how to make the resolution feel earned. The breakthrough came through a process known as creative desperation, where intense time pressure forces individuals to abandon preconceived ideas and take bold risks. With the film's release date fast approaching, Disney's leadership made a bold decision. They promoted Jennifer Lee to co-director, shaking up the creative hierarchy. This unexpected change disrupted the team's conventional thinking, pushing them to explore new narrative directions. Eventually, they landed on the idea that Anna's act of true love would not come from a romantic partner, but from her selfless choice to protect Elsa. This redefinition of the classic true love trope became one of Frozen's most celebrated aspects. Duhigg ties these insights to broader lessons about innovation. He argues that great ideas rarely emerge from isolated geniuses, but rather from teams that cultivate diverse perspectives and embrace uncertainty. Creativity flourishes in environments where people feel free to experiment, challenge conventions, and take risks. The success of Frozen was not the result of a single visionary moment, but rather the cumulative effect of collaboration, iteration, and willingness to abandon failing ideas in search of better ones. The chapter concludes by emphasizing that innovation is not about luck or sudden inspiration, but about creating conditions where breakthroughs can occur. Organizations and individuals that foster cross-disciplinary thinking, tolerate uncertainty, and encourage risk-taking are far more likely to generate creative solutions. Just as Frozen was saved by a combination of idea brokerage and creative desperation, anyone seeking to innovate must be willing to embrace discomfort, seek out diverse influences, and persist through failure until something truly groundbreaking emerges. Absorbing data, turning information into knowledge in Cincinnati's public schools. The chapter begins with a scene inside South Avondale Elementary School, where students prepare for a hot pencil drill. As the principal's voice crackles over the PA system, students race to complete a math quiz as quickly as possible. This high-energy exercise is part of a broader transformation taking place at the school, one that has radically improved academic performance. However, just a few years earlier, South Avondale was one of the worst schools in Cincinnati. In 2007, the school's test scores were so low that officials debated closing it altogether. The surrounding neighborhood had struggled with poverty, gang violence, and deteriorating public services for decades. Teachers saw students coming to school malnourished, traumatized, and often unable to focus. Despite the city pouring millions of dollars into South Avondale, investing in computer labs, tutoring programs, and after-school activities, the school remained one of the lowest-performing institutions in Ohio. Even with extensive resources, the data-driven solutions the district had implemented weren't making a difference. One of the major issues was the sheer amount of data being collected but not effectively used. Cincinnati had become one of the first school districts in the nation to embrace big data in education, tracking every student's test scores, attendance records, and academic progress through online dashboards. The system was designed to provide teachers with detailed insights into student performance, but in practice, most teachers ignored the data. The reports were dense, filled with statistics, and difficult to translate into actionable classroom strategies. Many educators felt overwhelmed by the influx of information and continued teaching as they always had. In 2008, 6 years after the dashboards were introduced, more than 90% of South Avondale's teachers admitted they rarely looked at them. That same year, 63% of the school's third graders failed to meet basic academic benchmarks. In response, Cincinnati launched the Elementary Initiative, EI, a radical new approach that focused not on increasing the amount of data, but on changing how teachers interacted with it. Unlike previous reforms, the EI did not provide additional funding, extra teachers, or new tutoring programs. Instead, it introduced a simple yet powerful concept, forcing educators to physically engage with data. The key innovation of the EI was the data room, a designated space where teachers were required to gather at least twice a month to manually review student performance. Instead of relying on digital dashboards, educators wrote down each student's test scores on individual index cards. These cards were then arranged into color-coded piles based on performance levels: red for struggling students, yellow for those meeting expectations, and green for those excelling. Teachers would then discuss trends, compare notes, and brainstorm intervention strategies based on the physical representation of the data. Initially, many teachers viewed the data room as a bureaucratic nuisance. The process was time-consuming and seemed redundant, since all the information was already available online. However, as they physically moved index cards around and grouped students by shared weaknesses, they began to notice patterns that had previously gone undetected. For example, one group of teachers discovered that students from a specific neighborhood consistently struggled with fractions but excelled in pronoun use, while another group showed the opposite trend. By swapping lesson plans between classrooms, they were able to target these weaknesses more effectively. Over time, teachers started devising their own experiments, such as tracking whether smaller reading groups led to better comprehension, or if swapping students between certain teachers improved performance. The results of the EI were dramatic. By 2010, just 2 years after its implementation, South Avondale saw its test scores skyrocket. 80% of third graders were reading at grade level, and 84% passed the state math exam. The school earned an excellent rating from state officials, a remarkable turnaround from its previous status as an academic failure. The EI was so successful that it was hailed by the White House as a model for inner-city education reform. Researchers from across the country traveled to Cincinnati to study what had made the program work. Teachers at South Avondale credited data-driven decision-making for the school's transformation, but when asked, many admitted they still rarely looked at the online dashboards. The true breakthrough was not the availability of data, but the process of engaging with it in a meaningful, hands-on way. Duhigg connects this story to a broader discussion on information blindness, a phenomenon where people struggle to process and act on data when they are overloaded with too much information. In modern society, people are surrounded by data, from fitness trackers measuring every step to financial apps tracking spending habits, but often fail to use it effectively. Studies have shown that while information is more accessible than ever, decision-making has not necessarily improved. The problem is that most data is passively consumed rather than actively engaged with. The success of Cincinnati's elementary initiative demonstrates that people learn best when they interact with information in a way that forces them to think critically and draw connections. The chapter concludes with the insight that simply having access to information is not enough. What matters is how people process and use it. Whether in education, business, or personal productivity, the key to turning information into knowledge lies in making it disfluent, harder to absorb at first, but ultimately more impactful. Just as Cincinnati's teachers had to physically manipulate data before they could understand it, individuals and organizations must find ways to actively engage with information rather than passively consuming it. The lesson from South Avondale is that true learning happens not when data is easy to access, but when it is difficult enough to demand deep engagement. And that's a wrap on Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg. If you found these insights valuable, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your biggest takeaways. And if there's a book you'd like me to summarize next, let me know in the comments. See you in the next one, with much love and gratitude.